from the academic point of view. I just started the Julian Jaynes's work on the bicameral mind, consciousness, and the breakdown of a bicameral mind. And it's fascinating so far. I'm just about, 20, 30 pages in, and really an interesting guy he was, and the way he's already breaking consciousness down through sort of an apophatic process. And any thoughts on his work? I know you touch on him a lot in previous episodes and
Yeah,
Here for the Truth. And
yeah. Well, I love his work because that's a case in point. That came up there because we were trying to explain why tarot cards work and astrology works.
mhm.
And there is an alternative theory that I think Julian Jaynes points us in the right direction. It's not the absolute answer, but during this bicameral period, whatever instruction we were getting from the internal mind when it was auditory hallucinations, the whole symbolic world was activated in a very, very powerful way. Call it the right brain or whatever, right? So the symbols that you get in tarot and astrology and in runes as well, a lot of other things, that's where they were inaugurated. That's where they come from. And even though many, many barriers have been put out in between, so we've lost the meaning, but when we see something like the Hermit card or the Hangman, and images like that, there's an old bicameral memory of what that strange symbol said to us back then. It could relate to the pyramid. It could relate to phenomena. I actually think it does. There was some heavy duty. It goes back to catastrophism again. There's lots of tie-ins to Julian Jaynes's work. You can't study him on his own. You can't study him on his own. But when you add him as a valuable piece to the table, whoa, a lot of things that remained in the darkness suddenly become illuminated that weren't when you just added simply, Jung or whoever, right? It wasn't quite grasping it. His work, when combined correctly with other work, really starts to explain a lot of things. In the beginning was the word. Well, in the bicameral period, in the beginning was the word, right? You were instructed by an inner voice. We still are instructed by an inner voice, but this voice is a monad that we call ourself. But where's the self located? Again, we're into the realm of ideas and metaphors. There's no internal space actually where this I resides. So it's metaphor. It's a metaphorical space. Well, what the hell is that when it's home? What part of me developed a metaphorical space? Right? And then I have ideas chasing after ideas, an idea of the self about the self. This is very, very strange. Right? The whole thing of metaphor. In fact, it's even embodied in our language. When I say, and we were talking earlier about consciousness. So when I say what a thing is, in language, metaphor points to the direction that we don't say what the thing is, we say what it's like. In fact, we even use this word like constantly in our language, in a colloquial, everyday sense. Well, that's a
Similar.
metaphor. Yeah, it's similar to something else. But when I go to that something else, I find that it is similar to something else. It's also pointing, no, don't focus on me. I'm like something else. So we have to keep on going on this weird journey where everything is not as it is, but like something else. So finally, somebody like a Julian Jaynes or Owen Barfield would jump to mind here as well, start saying, what is this ultimate thing that all you buggers are like? When I interrogate the things of the world, the reality, everything is like something else. My language opens this up and reveals itself, that this is what's happening from the oldest times. In fact, Barfield showed that the earliest language is even more rich with metaphor than the ones that we're using today. And yet today it's full of metaphor. I feel as hungry as a wolf, or she's as cold as ice, right? Back in earlier days, the metaphors, Matt, are more sophisticated. Early Anglo-Saxon poetry, the whole thing we can get into, Urdu poetry, whatever it might be. Barfield is saying this was even richer in ancient times. So then the question arises, why is this? Why are we not apprehending a thing in and of itself? It's always like something else. So then they offer, the beauty about Jaynes and Barfield and these people is that they offer an explanation for that. And the ultimate road that they travel is that, look, there must be a certain one thing that all the other things are like. They point to each other metaphorically, but we couldn't even have that reality. We couldn't have that as a phenomena of language and of consciousness unless there's one thing that is the ultimate antitype and archetype that everything is comparing itself to. Everything else is like another thing. But if we take that through to its conclusion, then there must be one archetypal truth, phenomena, whatever, that all things are really comparing themselves to. See? And Schelling would say, well, that's right, that's spirit. All things are coded. If you look deeply into them, they all have this hallmark to say, I am not myself. I am like that which created me. I am a shard. I am a fragment of the whole. Every single piece carries that fractally within it. So when I go to interrogate each individual particular, those very things point me in the direction of the whole. So the materialist is a fucking liar, is what this means. The materialist knows this, but refuses to follow the path. So then Barfield and Jaynes say, we're not going to accept you. Well, Jaynes is a bit different. He sort of remained within the academic materialistic paradigm, but his works are saying something else. And even then he was hinterlanded. Barfield was much more brave and said, no, I'm going to follow this. I'm not going, this leads away from a materialistic point of view. If every particular piece of matter that I can encounter, including our own language by which we think, we form our own thoughts through language, and that's how I communicate with an external world, is all based in this underlying metaphor. And even the I that is doing all of this is itself occupying a metaphorical space within. Then we need to follow that up and ask, is it all just insubstantial phantoms then? That's what the metaphor is. Where do these metaphors come from? Now, the materialists do have their own rebuttal to this, by the way. I will add that. But you have to critique it and find out how weak it is. And it also has to do with this division between the brains as well, things we don't have time to explore, right? The right brain, left brain thing really comes into its own right here. Because the right brain is the part that understands what the metaphors are all about and has this inclusive whole. It's not perplexed by the thing that one thing is saying, I'm like another. The left brain just can't get it and wants to. That's why the left brain is what it is. It tried to cement and hold things down manually. Don't tell me you're like something else. Reveal your secrets now, or I'll thrash the fucking life out of you. Come on, matter. Come on, things. And when it wouldn't, it just said, okay, everything's just matter. And it stuck to that like a mad golem, just held on to this one thing when it damn well knows it right in its hands, that's slipping away. But it won't address this. So it parks Barfield and it parks Jaynes and anybody else who tries to deal with this and brings in some people from Berkeley, all these guys to try and refute this stuff. And they got some brilliant. I love what they're doing and I see what they're doing, but I also see the limitations of it. So this stuff that we're talking about leads the way back to a state of wholeness and back to spirit in a very Schellingian way. By the way, Owen Barfield was completely committed to German thought. His master was called Samuel Taylor Coleridge, the great English poet, who was called the British Schelling.
Right.
So there you are. There's your connection. There's your link, your connective tissue. Barfield was a German idealist, as his mentor, Samuel Taylor Coleridge, was. And Schelling even knew about him. The real Schelling even knew and gave a nod to Coleridge when his colleagues told him there's a guy over in England doing what you're doing. He goes in, good for him. Go ahead. Steal as much as you want. Take as much of my work as you want, as long as it's getting out there.
Right.
He was an Aquarius, so he didn't care. So these men are picking up on this extraordinary quirk of human language, knowing that it reveals something about consciousness. Consciousness refused to be pinned down. The very techniques by which we were meant to understand consciousness are very, very weird. They're whimsical. They don't directly speak of consciousness. They speak of what it's like. This is happening when we even use our own language. But, again, look what's been made of linguistics. Nobody chases this up. They do the whole other, deconstructionistic thing and refuse that there is even a context. They're up to all sorts of shenanigans to lead you in a separate direction as to what really language is doing. But language is a kind of thinking, a kind of thinking that brings us to a world, but it does it in a way that's extremely anti-materialistic when you really know what you're dealing with. And so I've written on that. There's an article called Age of Idolatry, where I a little bit go into, Barfield's work, and there's more to be done on that. But remember, the very I that you say that you are occupies a space that doesn't exist. You can dissect any part of your physiognomy and you will not find an I in there. So the I is metaphorical, and the space that it allegedly occupies is a metaphor. Well, who created that metaphor? It's an imponderable. It's an imponderable. And when you asked about certainty, this is what replaces certainty. Right brain, imponderability. The right brain can handle it. The left brain cannot. So what it does is it interrogates, right? It grabs you, it puts you into a corner and holds you there for all time and wants to put you in these iron manacles. Blake called it the mind-forged manacles. And it wants to submit all of reality to this ratio that Blake talked about. The great compasses that he showed, God with the great compasses. That's what the left brain is all about. It refuses to think along these more numinous plastic lines, right? And it demands certainty, a part of our own brain. And until we know about it, until we know about neuroscience, until we've studied it and its limitations, there can be no change. So, this is where your people like Julian Jaynes come in is very, very valuable on multiple levels. Their work is very, very essential to bring to the table. Not just for the reasons he claims, but there are other offshoots of it as well. Because there's something very, very odd going on. And on Slave, we're dedicated to unpacking all of that.